Welcome to this talk. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about practical strategies to boost your QMS or your quality management system document compliance. And just let's get straight into it. My name is Kathy Walsh. I am the Managing Director of a company called Quality Systems Now. We are a small consulting company in Australia. And we deal primarily with pharmaceutical, medical device and biotech manufacturers or sponsors. And we work with them around their QMS. We do lots of QMS and documentation work, lots of quality and compliance work. We do a little bit of validation as well. And we help companies at all stages of their journey, from getting their license, their GMP license or their ISO accreditation, all the way through to helping different size companies in their business as usual as well. I have over 25 years experience in those industries, working both as an employee, but also as a consultant. And as I said, we do lots of QMS work, helping businesses transform their QMS and different areas of their business. And you'll hear me talk a little bit about plain language, particularly as we're going to talk about documentation. So just a little bit of contents and an agenda for what the talk will be about. I'm going to talk to you about the problem, the document compliance problems that you might actually see, and the types of issues that cause them, and also issues that they might then have a cause on as well. And so we'll spend a little bit of time on those two, 1 and 2, and I'm going to take a different slant to tackling this problem and actually look at it in terms of human behaviour and also the size of the business. And so, the smaller the business, it's also related to the maturity of the business. Then we'll look at some QMS and a little bit of strategy on how to overcome these types of problems, some key takeaways, and then we'll go into the Q&A session. And hopefully you'll have some good, juicy comments and questions. Okay, so document compliance problems. I actually just wanted to start off and just recant a bit of the story. There was a few years ago, a client contacted me. They had a poor response in an FDA audit. They received several documentation citations, and they were not quite sure how to approach it. They were going to go down the track of just fixing the documentation, but they decided that they would call me in and actually see, is there something else going on here? How should we approach this? How should we fix this? And the issues that they were faced with were the auditor said that they had missing procedures, and they did. They had areas of the business where they were in manufacturing and there was no oversight. There was no oversight of procedures dictating what was actually going on. So procedures were missing. They also had procedures that were missing detail. So they didn't have enough information in them so that the employees could then actually do their job. And then they had the situation where that was clear from audited records that the employees actually weren't then following the SOP. So they had 3 different types of problems around documentation. So thinking about that, particularly an auditor will use those types of terms, missing procedure, incomplete procedure, or procedure not followed, when you see documentation compliance problems. So what's really going on in that situation? And if you go to particularly the FTA, they look at, they publish all the different deficiencies and citations that they actually give over a year. And you can have a look and see what are the top types of deficiency that they actually find. And year upon year, you can actually almost guarantee that documentation issues are going to be in that top 5. Now, everyone understands that documents are required for compliance. So why is this a continual problem? And I think it's not a straightforward answer. So is it about a QMS failure? Is it a lack of training? Is it incompetence? Is it senior leadership are not engaged? Or is it something else that's going on? Or is it a mixture? Or is there a deeper issue here? So let's delve into that a little bit. And I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I'm not going to go down the look at documentation to start with. Let's actually think about what's going on in the company, and let's look at different size companies. And I think you'll find that there's different types of documentation issues depending on the maturity and the size of the company. Let's think about what's really going on. What's that root cause? Because compliance and behaviour are actually quite closely linked. And that's where I'm going to introduce you to what I call the people piece, and that is that compliance, quality culture, and people's behaviour also impact what's going on in your QMS and your documentation. I'll look at types of issues, and then we'll talk about strategies. How do I overcome common behavioural problems? So if you've got behaviours, mindsets, those types of things that are prevalent in the company culture that aren't causing or at least contributing to document compliance, how do you influence that? And then strategies around putting in place user-friendly procedures, systems, and also trying to influence personnel habits. And then obviously my favourite is around how do you put in place user-friendly procedures. So first of all, let's take a step back and think about the company. Maybe think about the company that you're in, depending on what your role is, and think about your company. Look at what else is going on in the company that might be driving document compliance issues. Let's think about what is the real root cause for compliance issues around documentation. So let's think about QMS documentation problems related to company size. And when I say company size, that's also quite closely related to company compliance maturity. So I've got their startups, scaling, and large companies. Startups are probably, you might have a few employees, anything up to about maybe 15. Scaling, 15 to several hundred, and then large is probably several hundred to several thousand, or however big the company is. Let's think about the systems and the way people work in those different type of companies. So in your startups, they may not yet have got their accreditation or their license. They may not have their product yet registered. So they are almost always starting with a manual system. Not everyone, but usually it's a manual system, hard copy documents that they're actually reading, or they might have a PDF on a SharePoint, that type of situation, but they don't have an EQMS. The main team involved in the startup are more R&D or technically focused. They're usually not compliance focused. They may not even have a quality manager at this stage. And so you may have someone who's developed the product. They may be the inventor. This is very common in medical device companies, and where they've actually developed a new technology, that type of thing. And they are very, very much product focused. And so these are the technical specialists, and so they are worried about the product. How do we make the product? They're putting a facility and a manufacturing facility in place, and it's really looking at getting that product ready to go to market. And they're not so much thinking about the compliance aspects. Sometimes when I work with these guys, you've got to roll them back a little bit before they can go forward, and just looking at what they're doing. And you find that in this situation, these people are usually the ones who are trying to write your procedures. And so sometimes that doesn't work because they just have a different mindset and they're not thinking about compliance. So we'll talk about the issues and documentation issues around that in the next slide. Let's look at scaling. So they've moved along a little bit. They've got a few more employees. They're finding that a manual system for their QMS no longer works for them, and it's laborious. So they have to put in place either an electronic QMS, or it might be an electronic DMS or learning management system. So they're looking at software to actually start introducing some workflows and some automation. In this situation, you've got one or two, up to maybe 5 people who are very compliance experienced. Hopefully they should have a QA manager and a QA team at this stage. But the business is now very business focused. They're trying to sell. they're looking to get their product out the door, they're trying to get market share. And so senior leadership are very focused on, we need to get into the market. And so QA then become the police, or they police and write the documents. And so it's still very it's one-sided. Compliance are doing trying to address documentation issues, and the rest of the business is just doing product, and they're spinning their wheels a little bit. And then when you get to large, you've got integration and automation in place, and so that in itself can create potential issues around your documentation. There should be a strong compliance maturity across the company, but not always. You can have some pockets of resistance there, or people who have moved into the industry and haven't come up through the ranks. And so potentially that can cause some compliance issues around documents. The company at this stage, they usually are compliance focused. Senior leadership are not trying to cut corners. They want to be compliance orientated. And so that's a good thing. But sometimes that doesn't filter all the way down to the bottom ranks as well. And in larger companies, you do find people starting to specialise, and you can get tech writers or technical writers who are the ones who are generating documentation. So they're the types of things that are going on in those size of company. What's really going on in terms of behaviour and also compliance issues. So in our startup, quite often you've got your owner or the inventor, or they may have investors that are involved, and they are driving activities. And so compliance quite often is not their first point of call. There's lots of role sharing. So people are doing multiple things, just trying to meet that deadline. We're going live. Here's our go live for our product. That creates time pressures to get into commercialization. And the QMS is kind of thought of as a bolt-on. Quite often, the owner or the inventor is just thinking, oh, I'm going to have a folder of procedures and it's going to sit on the shelf, and that's for the auditor. And they don't think about how that needs to be integrated across the business. When you've got your scaling companies, your CEO is much more in the chair and they are driving activities. You have a QA manager who's trying to hold compliance together, and there's a lot of business pressures to actually make sales. And so there's a lot of, sometimes it's antagonism, but I tend to call it argy-bargy between compliance and the operations side of the business. And so obviously that needs to be balanced, but sometimes you can find in these situations that compliance takes a second tier. And the QMS can still be thought on as a bolt-on, but they are starting to integrate and starting to think about how compliance can actually help them deliver their product. Into large companies, top management usually are engaged. Sometimes they're not, but most of the time they are at least engaged and wanting to be compliant. The QMS is integrated through the operations. But again, there can be pockets where that doesn't happen. They're looking for efficiency and compliance in their operations, and the QMS is considered to represent the whole business. So they're the activities and things that are going on. How does document compliance issues sit across the top of that? Well, let's think about if you were to get an audit response and you see missing procedure. So you've got an audit report on your company. Think about your company and you see missing procedure. Now, if you are a startup, what could potentially be the root cause? So it could be that your company culture is not QMS focused. It's not focused on compliance. And so that can cause some problems. That could be that could actually be part of the root cause. It could also be that the process is not fully defined or mapped. And so if the business doesn't understand what they do from end to end, then that can cause problems. And that's actually quite a common problem. People understand pockets of what goes on, but they don't understand the end to end. And so that can create some problems with document compliance. The procedure is in someone's head. And so that could be your inventor who is who has a whole pile of knowledge in their head because they've gone through the whole development process of the product, but when they're getting to the stage of wanting to put a procedure in place, it's still in their head. They haven't got it down on a piece of paper, and that definitely is a compliance problem. It's also closely related to that next one. Procedure is high-level info only, and so it's thin in information. It's not enough information for someone who doesn't know what's going on to either be trained in it or be able to do their job day to day consistently. That leads into there could be an inconsistent staff training. So if they're small, they may have just employees may have just been given a procedure to read. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to them, and they're trying to learn on the job. So you get inconsistencies in the way staff are trained. Or the SOP may not be enforced. And so that's the situation where you've got a set of documents that sit on a shelf that are not used to actually drive the business activity. What I really want to draw your attention to is this quote down here. So behaviours and culture have a huge influence on compliance. So just thinking about how people behave and how that is related to compliance issues. So what happens if you're in that scaling size of a business? You see an audit report that says missing procedure. What could that actually mean? What you might find is, and if you're a QA manager, you may relate to this, is that the QA manager is trying to influence culture. And so they know what needs to be done. They don't have enough time in the day to be able to do it themselves. And they really are trying to get people across the business to pick up the compliance hat and do things properly. And so the QA manager in this situation, they're managing up, they're managing sideways, and they're managing down. And so that can be quite difficult. It can be draining. If it can also... sometimes in these situations, you find that the QA manager leaves within a few years. That's a shame, obviously, but it can be because they just find that they are struggling against the rest of the business. Staff, they might be trained, but there's pockets of resistance, or there's recalcitrant line managers who continue to want to do things the way that they want to do things, or they don't want to do things consistently the same way. If you're a QA manager, you've probably also been in the same position as wanting to fix everything before your next audit. And so I know several QA managers, that is that's what they fall back to. They try and do the influence of different parts of the business, but in the end, they come back and they come through and fix it. And so there's some negativities associated with that as well. Processes are not consistently executed and records not consistently documented, and that there's many reasons for why that happens. And documentation is still considered paperwork, and so I think this tends to happen in not necessarily in operations. I see this in warehouse and engineering, those types of things, where there's a mindset that people do their job and then paperwork's an extra, and so it's instead of thinking about documentation and records are actually part of your job. All right, so that's the scaling size of the company. Let's look at large. Missing procedure, can that possibly be related to? So culture is compliance focused most of the time. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a gap. Or sometimes if you've got new staff coming in, they're still getting up to speed. Responsibilities usually are well understood, but sometimes, again, there's a gap in changing the baton. Procedures are usually well documented and communicated, but all of these first three are good, but when you get to a large company, the QMS is large. You're talking about thousands of documents usually, and not even looking at records. That's just the documentation, specifications, or that type of document. And so that becomes in itself difficult to manage. And so things can get missed. So I guess that in those first three, that's kind of what I'm alluding to. You are talking about a big beast now. The QMS in a large company is in itself a full-time job just to manage it. So in those situations, the periodic review and the change control to actually make improvements and updates, that can either lag or it can actually cause issues sometimes. If you've got the situation where you've got multiple departments who want to make slight changes to one particular procedure, all they want to do is change a sentence. So they're just doing what I call band-aid changes. They're not making holistic changes and looking at the whole process end to end. And so large companies fall into this a lot in terms of not actually going back and doing a holistic review of the whole process. And it's usually because people don't have the time. They want to just move forward. I only need to make a change to this sentence and then everything's good. However, there might be other areas of the document which they are unaware of, which really do need to be reviewed more thoroughly. So that can be a problem in large companies. The other thing too, with temporary changes or planned deviations, depending on which term you use, they may not be well executed. And so this is where a communication issue and a documentation issue as well. Usually at this stage, SOPs are enforced by line managers, but again, you can get some areas of the business who are more compliant than others. So just to reinforce again, behaviours and cultures have a huge influence on your compliance, and that is especially true for your documentation compliance. All right. What's the common denominator? Well, it's the people. The people are the common denominator to any or all compliance issues. The reason is obviously people are what I call a bit messy. We're not robots. We don't come to work and do exactly the same thing each and every day. We've got other things going on in our lives, and that can impact us at work. And so the common denominator is the people. And when you're thinking about compliance issues, particularly repeat compliance problems, you need to start thinking about people and behaviour and how to influence that. All right. So this is what I call the people piece. So you want to make sure that you're trying to influence those behaviours. And just a note, when you're starting to influence around culture and behaviours, it doesn't just happen overnight. And it needs to be a consistent, positive message, and it takes time. So don't think you're going to close out a behavioural issue with a kappa. You're going to have to continually reinforce, positively reinforce. Okay. You need to work with human nature, not against it. So, for example, people don't like change. How do you manage that? Because you do need to make changes. People like to do things their way. And so you need to be able to manage that, either stop them from being able to do it or influence them so that they understand why they need to do it a particular way. There is a transition to this. So there is the time around that. That's that positive reinforcement and communication. People will ignore a process if it's too complex. If there is a way for them to do a workaround, a complex problem, then they will find a workaround. And they won't tell you about it. So you'll find out about it with the auditor while you're sitting there opposite the auditor almost always. And I guess I started thinking a lot about this. If you've read the book Atomic Habits, you can actually think about how people do things and their habits of what they're doing. And it's actually related to how we work in the workplace as well. We have habits with how we deal with documentation and all those types of things. And so it's actually a good read thinking about your compliance problems. Okay, so make processes and systems as easy to use as possible. And if you can link a good habit with something else that they're doing, and it's called habit stacking. And so if you can do that with your compliance, then it's actually going to help to start change people's mindsets in what they're doing. All right. So that's everything around compliance issues. Let's think about the types of issues. Okay. These are pretty straightforward. You're looking at systems, electronic systems, workflows, integrations, interfaces between different systems. Your processes. Some processes will have hotspots, particularly at interfaces of different processes or between different teams. They can be hotspot areas. Procedures, user-friendly. You want to make sure that they are kept up to date and there's not too much there is enough detail there. Record keeping needs to follow our COA, and responsibilities are clear, enforced, and they do need to be sensible. So that is the types of things that will impact your document compliance. Let's have a little bit of a deeper look. So what are the strategies to boost that compliance or the quality culture aspect, thinking about your documents, particularly in your records? So I've got 4 aspects there. So you want to drive compliance maturity and understanding across the business. Now, if you are the QA manager, there's multiple ways to do this, and some places you need to think about what works in your business as well. But you really do want to make sure that you're trying to drive that maturity. You might think about influencing how you hire new people. That's a really good thing, because if you keep hiring the wrong people, that is an issue in terms of your compliance. You might think about how you're educating as opposed to training people. So education is a continual thing that happens, whereas training is, here's your document, read your document, or do your training assessment, etc. Communication and knowledge sharing opportunities. So this is really just increasing the knowledge and technical ability of people within the business, and helping them understand not just their part of it, but their part in the whole process. Then you're looking at simple and compliant processes, systems, and personnel habits. So if you can get those in place, then that's going to obviously set you up for a good position, and then hopefully top management are engaged. If top management are not engaged, this is difficult. And so sometimes you need to, if you're a QA manager, or even if you're an ops manager, sometimes you have to manage up if that top level are not as compliance savvy as they probably need to be. How do you do this? Well, one of the best ways to do this is with a Gemba or a Gemba walk, depending on how you pronounce that. So this is where you're getting into the plant and you're with people as they're doing activities. So the management and line management are at the coalface. And so that is one of the best ways to actually, it drives communication. It also drives relationship building between different areas of the business. Training and cross-training. So that's obviously training in someone's role, but that cross-training, understanding what happens downstream, what happens upstream. And that also leads in nicely to that second one there, developing process improvement teams from multidisciplinary areas of the business. And so that can be very helpful. Use your top management and business language to communicate compliance. Let's just park on that just for a second. So QA managers, and I'm talking to you a lot in this, QA managers, if you are struggling to communicate to your top management, or you're finding that you don't have the influence that you would like, it might be because you're going and talking to them and just talking regulation speak. You're just talking all about compliance, blah, 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 and it's just white noise to them because it's not their language. It's not the terms that they use. So I would recommend that you adjust your terminology and how you speak to different people within the business, depending on what they understand. So frame your compliance requirements around business requirements and around OPEX, if you're talking to operations and production, or lean, if you're talking to those guys. So think about what they understand and what drives their part of the business, and then think about how to communicate compliance around that. Now, OPEX and lean and compliance just go hand in hand. There's no problem there at all. If you're going to talk to your top management, think about the dollars. How much does it cost? How long is it going to take? And think about those types of things as well if you're going to talk to and influence that top level. All right, that was an aside, but that's a really important part of influencing culture. You want to make sure you've got plain language documents. There's nothing worse than trying to read a document that is just hard to look at, it's poorly written, and you can't find the information that you want. Keep things simple. Don't overcook your processes and systems. Don't try and make things too complex or too smart. Just make sure that it's doing what it needs to do. Okay. Strategies around user-friendly processes, systems, and your personnel habits. So let's look at the processes to start with over here. Keep them simple, keep them linear. And when I say linear, not a lot of feedback loops, not a lot of approval steps. If you can combine those, then that will actually make the process a lot smoother, a lot more efficient. You would be surprised how much you can get out of mapping your processes. If you get a department who maps their processes, or if you've got end-to-end across multiple departments and you map that, it becomes a visual aid for people to then, you can train against it, but it's also a place where you can come and pinpoint, there's a hotspot there, why is there a hotspot there? Or is there a process problem here? Do we need to make an improvement? And so if you process map your processes, it actually brings a lot of clarity to the business. If you haven't done that, I would recommend that you do that. Obviously, you want to limit multiple approval steps where you don't need them, combine them. Otherwise, it's backwards, forwards between QA and somewhere else can be really difficult. You need to understand critical control points and efficiencies, obviously, for an operations process. And you need to understand interfaces between different processes, but also between a process and a team, or different teams as well. So that's processes. Let's look at systems. So software systems or any other systems. Before you implement one, please do a user requirement specification, a URS. Every company is unique in their requirements. And so even if a vendor does give you a URS for a software system, that's great, but you will have unique requirements yourself. And you need to understand that, one, so you can select the best tool or the best software or the best system, but also so that you can understand what are your gaps, what do you need, where are your risks, etc. It's good to understand and have an interface that's logical and simple to use. There's nothing worse than software that's hard to navigate. Please do user acceptance testing with your users. Don't just get your vendor to say, here it is, and they switch it on. And map the workflows. And this is important because these are actually your processes in the software. And so there's many companies really do themselves a lot of damage, actually, because they don't consider how many document changes and document issues are created when you go to a new system, but you don't think about the wider aspects, because all of those processes that were in your manual system are now going to change because they are being managed by an electronic system, and there will be a knock-on effect to other documents, etc. Habits and behaviours of your personnel. This is where doing the Gemba walks, observing those activities in progress, helps you build relationships across the business. So people on the shop floor are now, they're not intimidated by a line manager, or they're not intimidated to come and talk to QA about something. And so you're actually building relationship and communication across the business. Make sure you communicate the why. Don't just create rules for the sake of rules, and let people have right of reply. That's also very good for building those relationships, and then a robust process. And embed those triggers for good habits within the QMS or the process. And that goes back to thinking about habit stacking with atomic habits. All right. So why is it important to do this, thinking about documentation compliance? So all of those things that I've actually just talked about all start to point towards creating more user-friendly procedures, more user-friendly documentation. And you can be, being a technical writer as well, you can be the best writer in the world, but if the process or the system or how people actually execute the process is poor, then the SOP will be poor, the procedure will be poor. You cannot write a good procedure if any of those things are broken. So can you now start to understand when we say missing procedure, information missing, and not following a procedure, there's a whole pile of things that could actually be the real root cause to that. All right. And my favourite strategies to have user-friendly procedures. Teach select people in the business how to write in plain language, how to write user-friendly procedures. There will be people in your business, and if it's a small business, it may only be one, but there will be someone who likes doing documentation. They will like getting into fonts and styles and all the things that tech writers enjoy. And they are your natural person to cultivate as a tech writer within your business. It's great to have one in each department, and then they can actually then be responsible for updates for that department. And then they start to talk to QA get to know them, and so then your QMS becomes stronger. Writing SOPs actually requires a specific skill, and it should be taught within the business. You need to teach people how to write your SOPs, teach them how to use your templates, because they won't just know. And many people then struggle. Senior leaders think that people should know how to write because they've been to university. Well, go and read some of the articles and papers that you see in academic journals, and some of those are very, very poor. So being at a university does not mean that you automatically know how to write. Please teach your people how to write. One of the ways you can help and control is to put in place controlled templates. They're set up for how you want them done with plain language. And I embed the style guide within the template. So if I go into a new client, I never put in place a style guide. I embed everything that goes in the style guide within a template. So all the fonts, all the heading styles, all the sizes, etc., all go within those templates, and you control the template. And that is one, because no one reads a style guide unless they're maybe a tech writer. But most people do not want to sit down and read a style guide. It's much better and more efficient to put what you need in those templates. All right, SOP structure. Keep that front section, what I call the front matter, keep it short. Purpose, scope, roles and responsibilities, maybe safety requirements, and then straight into what your process needs. It's stage one. Everything else can go in the back matter. Okay, so if it's not needed before they start the process, please put it in the back. And then just make sure that your templates have that structure, and then you get consistency. People start understanding where to go for the references, or where to go for terms and abbreviations. That's in the back. And so that they get used to navigating your documents. Map the process. Okay, and so then once you've got a process map of what's going on, then each stage becomes a section within your SOP. Okay, and so the SOP then automatically follows what's going on in your process. It's in the right order, and the structure is already inbuilt. And have different formats for your procedures, your policies, and your instructions. And please teach your people what the difference is, what information should go in each one. If anyone's interested in plain language, I will be doing some training around this new standard that ISO has put out around plain language, and it's actually really quite good, and it is applicable to any industry. So watch out for that, and if not, you might actually want to go ahead and get that guidance yourself. All right. Number 3, QMS. Let's integrate the system within the business. So your QMS really, it should be an asset to your business. It shouldn't be a liability, and it's an asset when it's integrated. It's integrated with all the activities that you do. It's not a bolt-on. It's not a set and forget. It actually should describe your business. And when it's doing that, then it's doing its job. So an integrated QMS looks a bit like this, I guess. You've got a PDA, you've got your plan, do, check, act cycle, and your risk-based thinking. You've got top management who has oversight of everything, but really they are engaging with this top part here of the hierarchy. So the quality policy and the quality objectives. And then you've got your processes, which are documented in your procedures and instructions, and you've got your records. What's not shown here is the foundation, and the foundation sitting under here really should be your quality culture. Because if your quality culture is strong and you have mature compliance understanding, then this QMS is going to be doing its job. All right. Key takeaways. I've given you 4. There's probably some others. Compliance problems are rooted in behaviours. Understand the behaviour, improve the problem. Okay, it's probably not 100%, but most of your compliance issues, there will be a behaviour that has influenced it. Learn to communicate with different demographics in the business language with top management, OPEX or lean language with production and manufacturing, regulatory language with QA. The company's size or its age is often related to quality maturity. We talked a lot about that at the beginning. Different document compliance issues occur as the company matures and grows. So your company may grow, you still might have some documentation compliance issues, but the root cause behind that is probably now different because your company's growing. And the big one, teach your people how to write. Don't expect them to know from university. All right. If you've enjoyed this session, and if you'd like to know more, you can follow me on LinkedIn. I have a mastermind. It's all on LinkedIn. You can go there. I've got a mailing list for courses. You can go to my website. There's a course on Udemy, and there's also a course on my website. And I have a book. So all of those things you can look at, and most of those you can get to from my LinkedIn profile. And so Q&A session, we'll go into some Q&A, but thank you for your attendance. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed the talk.
So thank you, Kathy, for this enlightening talk. It's great to have you here live with us. It's the first time that you participate in such a summit, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. And it's been a great experience. And I think it's really great that people from all over the world can come together and talk about quality.
Yeah, from all over the world. And you are right now calling in from Australia?
That is correct. It is it's almost midnight here in Melbourne, Australia.
All right. Well, thank you to be late up, so late at night, I mean. Before we dive into the Q&A, let's do a little poll with the audience, if that's okay with you. So if you scan the QR code, you will be able to provide you with your opinion, your answer. And the first question that you will be able to see will appear then on your screen immediately, and I'm very curious to be able to read the question out loud for you guys. Just a little second. But I think it's about the document management system. I think, Kathy, that you provided the questions. Do you recall what the first question was?
Yeah, so I think my recollection was that asking everyone, does your company address the real root cause of documentation issues or citations? That was the question.
So does, and now it appears for me too, and it's exactly that, Kathy. Does your company address the real root cause of documentation issues or citations? Indeed. I'm not sure that I can see the percentages, but what I'm able to see is that most of you are answering yes. So let's wait a little bit longer because there are sometimes some delays. But if there would be a unanimous answer. And yes, by the way, I have now a view on the correct percentages. Oh, it's a 50-50.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, quite a division here. So does this surprise you, Kathy?
It does actually. It actually, to me, that means that there are a lot of people who have heard the talk and then started to think about other things, because I think half the audience is actually saying, actually, maybe we don't do this well. Then I think that's a really good thing that people are starting to think about other things in terms of behaviour and people, as opposed to, oh, we just need to fix the procedure. So yeah.
Okay, absolutely. So now we are going to move to the second question. And please, if you didn't go to the poll yet, I invite you to scan the QR code because your opinion is very valuable to us. The second question, if you were to list the top documentation problem in your company, what would it be? Poorly written procedures, top management not engaged in the QMS, a lack of compliance understanding, or other priorities. Do you have a guess, Kathy? What will be the top answer?
Yeah, I'm not surprised at that first one, I have to say.
Yeah, because we are seeing now 44% says top management not engaged, 44% lack of compliance understanding, and nearly 20% poorly written procedures and other priorities.
And other priorities,
yeah. So you're not surprised. That first topic is a lack of compliance understanding. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that one's easier to fix than top management not being engaged. So I think from a company point of view, the lack of compliance understanding is much easier and straightforward to fix than trying to influence top management to become engaged in compliance. So it's still quite high though. So that to me is saying that there are quite a few companies being represented that there are some senior leaders who need to there needs to be a bit of work done there. So.
All right. Well, thank you for participating in the poll, everybody. And now I would like to address some questions to you, Kathy. The first question is from Teimur Matin. I hope I do pronounce it correctly. If any change triggered during implementation, is it required to raise separate change control or amend it in running change control which was previously approved? And then it's not the end. For amendment, for amendment, is it required to take approval from all stakeholders or relevant personnel?
Yeah. So my very first question, my very first answer would be, what does your SOP say for you to do? And so you don't want to go in an opposite direction to what your procedure is saying. So if your procedure doesn't say anything about this, then you have got a gap there in your procedure because you're looking for this information. In terms of change controls, if you've got an implementation, you get halfway through the implementation and realise you forgot something, and that's actually really common. What I usually do, or what I've seen done as well, is you have like a you have like an additional form that you can actually say, okay, we need to add this on, we forgot to do it, or something like that. It needs to go through the same type of approvals, to the same people, but it may not go to the same level. So a lot of places put in place like a change control board or something like that. It might just be it goes to the quality manager and they say, yes, this is appropriate. But again, you need a process involved in that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Taimur, for your question, and thank you for your answer. Next question from Benjamin Jörg. On the people piece, my experience is that the manager or the leader shows the example, both good and bad. How do you see the role of the leader manager here?
Yeah. It might depend on their seniority, but I would actually say everyone in their own role is a leader. It's similar to saying everyone's responsible for quality. And so everyone can display leadership. So I think the leader and their team can work together. And I think there is a two-way thing there. It's not just the leader. However, the leader is the example. And so if your leader is not the example you want them to be, then it's about building that relationship with them, building the relationship and having the communication to be able to then manage up. And so that happens at all levels of the business. So, middle managers are doing it to senior managers. So I think everyone needs to come together. Everyone's working for the same company. They're all on the same side. There's no sides. And so, I think everyone can be a leader in their own role.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Another question from Ilse. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. Quintero. Any tips on how to create a true commitment to top management?
Yeah. The ISPE have actually put out a new guide on this. So it's called Quality Excellence. And there's a lot of information in that. So if your site is interested in moving in that type of direction, then I would actually recommend you have a look at that guidance. To answer your question, tips and tricks, I think the big thing here is communication and building relationship and using that to try and influence your culture. And I'm sure also Leslie Worthington will also have a bit to say about this too in her conversation and talk with you as well.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure indeed. Okay, so these were the questions. I don't know if you want to add something, some last takeaway for our audience?
I think just enjoy your documentation. It's a journey. There's no, we've arrived. Your documentation can always be a little bit better. Don't think that it's going to be just what I call set and forget. There's always improvements that you can make within your documentation, within your compliance, and also within your culture within the business.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great to hear that from you. Thanks a lot, Kathy, for being here with us and for your great insights. And I wish you good night.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure and I've really enjoyed doing this.